All right, welcome everybody. We are going to dig into how to avoid becoming a broke MSP. So let's jump right in. First things first, my name is Jim Peterson. I'm a Principal Solution Advisor and Cybersecurity PMM at ConnectWise. I'm also a former MSP owner in South Bend, Indiana with an exit in 2018. So I get all the benefits of the fun part of understanding what it's like to be an MSP owner, but I don't have the sleepless nights, which I'm pretty excited about today's world. All right, so what does a broke MSP look like? Well, we start by saying that their true profit is typically below 10%. Now, this is the hard part because when we talk about metrics, especially net profit and things like that, a lot of times MSP owners or even business owners in general will play with the numbers and they don't think they're doing that. But as an example, they'll set their salary at 30 or 50,000 when really that role would be 100, 125,000, maybe even quite a bit more. So they beef up the numbers, take the extra pay and distributions, and make their net profit look better than it is. So understanding that getting to true calculations is super critical in avoiding being a broke MSP because you got to know where you're at to know where you're going. A lot of times they'll also have high accounts receivable, and this is just money owed by clients. We've seen very, very large numbers in that accounts receivable bucket. So cash flow is hurting. And when you combine that with maybe a little bit lower profit, you can really have some stress and pain in there with when we come to the profitability. Next is, good, two at a time here, right? Low revenue efficiency. We're going to dig into revenue efficiency when we do a recurring revenue or revenue recovery process here in a second. But that last one is really critical. When we have a broke MSP, and I expect people to take a little bit of offense to that word, broke MSP, but it's kind of true, and we're really trying to rub that raw spot to say maybe I am in that bucket. But we feel stressed from both the staffing and client satisfaction challenges. We'll say that it's pretty easy to grow, and I'll throw some numbers out there, maybe to $1 million in revenue on, muscle and feel, just really working through it. We can have low profitability at that point and still earn a good living. But as soon as we have to start hiring a lot of people, as soon as we need leadership, as soon as we need sales and office management, it really comes out. So we feel that pain a lot. And that's going to hit again at like 3 million, maybe at 7 million, and again at 10 million as you're growing. You're going to have these additional layers that are necessary that are hard to do if we don't have the right profitability. So jumping into this, right, let's talk about a couple of quick metrics here. First things first, agreement gross profit, right? AGP of target is 65%. Now, what does AGP tell us, right? It tells us if you're delivering your service-based agreements, no products in there, but service-based agreements at a profitable fashion. So we'll get into calculation on that in a second, but it's a really important metric, kind of a level one metric to know. Are we doing a good job of avoiding being broke, right? Second is the service salaries to service revenue. And this is oftentimes also called the W-2 multiplier. Does your staffing and efficiency, right? So match up with the service revenue you're bringing in. So often we look at just the service team's W-2, but if we're buying things like AI assisted tools, maybe an RPA solution like ConnectWise RPA, right, we'd expect that to soften the sales, or sorry, the team revenue versus the service revenue versus the service salaries. Sorry. But at the end of the day, as we add those things in, we have to make sure that they're combining in there to get to that 33% or better. Next is gross profit. Now, I don't love the gross profit number too much because it really takes into consideration your balance of hardware, software, recurring software, and then those services. So this number can go up and down. A target of 42% is really just a generalized target based on some generalized metrics. So we don't spend a lot of time on that, but it gets a lot of love and a lot of attention. Next is that service GP. Now, if I was going to talk about one metric number to kind of point to whether we're struggling with profitability in an MSP, it would be this service gross profit, because it's just holistically saying the services you do, are you selling them profitably? Because where agreement gross profit can show a specific profitability of a single agreement or multiple agreements, we have non-agreement things too. So service GP is going to take all of the service salaries plus all of the non-agreement tools and all of the agreement tools to say, hey, are we set up? And then last is net profit. And similar to gross profit, we can have a great service GP and still have a bad net profit. And we're not going to dig into those challenges today. We're going to kind of stay above the line, but understand that we're targeting 17%. Best in class is 25, but a lot of the tough, stressful MSP numbers are going to hit that 10 and below percentage. Now, jumping right into No, the number one strategy to avoid being a broke MSP, and we're going to say it's really understanding the services that you deliver. And this starts by building a service catalog. And we're going to say everything that we do that involves people, we need to document it well. We need to understand what it does, what's included, and how much we're going to charge for it. By doing this, right, we can take the next steps to making sure we're pricing it effectively so that we can avoid that painful position of not having enough revenue, again, for today and the future. The critical part of this service catalog is to make sure we're manually doing this every year. Manually doesn't sound fun, right? But we have to make sure that, number one, if we bought new tools, that it gets added to the service catalog. And if we remove tools, it gets taken away. And that we're updating pricing based on challenges in the market, right? Inflation, pricing changes that we have to pay. We have to make sure that gets fed into our systems so we can charge our clients appropriately. So getting to that profitability side, right? When we think about pricing specifically our services, now just real quick, we sell products and we sell services, right? So M365 is always kind of one of those kind of weird areas, but at the end of the day, if it doesn't require people to deliver the solution, we call that a product. So that's going to be all our licensing, all our hardware, pretty straightforward. Now, the labor that it takes to either set it up or deploy it, that's going to be a service, but that's typically on the project labor side or something like that. What we're really talking about in this section is those agreements, and it's going to be your managed service agreements, your managed service security agreements, your managed backup agreements, things like that. Now, getting to the right pricing on here, it's been challenging historically for a lot of MSP owners, especially if you're a little newer to this process. But there's a pretty straightforward formula that can tell us how to get to the right number. We just have to prove it out over time. So first things first, we're going to take all of our costs. Now, these are going to be our direct agreement costs. So when you think of the stack, right, everything included to deliver that specific agreement, in a lot of cases we'll have RMM, MDR, email protection, these basic things that you do from a cybersecurity perspective. We want to make sure we have all those in at the cost level, not what you would charge for it if you were going to sell it directly, but what you actually pay for it. This may be very obvious to a lot of people, but not for everyone. So we want to make sure we get some clarity in there. Second, we have to look at that agreement labor. And this is where it gets challenging because most of the time when we have a bad agreement gross profit, it typically ties to labor because it's so much more expensive on a per unit basis. So if we look at an agreement and we'll just call it managed services agreement, we're doing it per user just for simplicity. And we may say on average, our delivery takes about an hour and a half per user per month. And an hour of that's technician and a half hour of that is engineer. Now we have to know those team members' hourly costs, but we can calculate that pretty easily. And knowing that one customer is going to be a little bit different than another customer, and then month over month, they're going to be a little bit different. But it's trying to give us a target. Now, here comes the math, right? It's pretty straightforward, but hopefully this makes sense. So we know that our agreement target is 65%. Now what this means, for every dollar in service revenue that we bring in, we can spend 35 cents on tools and on labor. So if we take that tool cost and then we take that labor cost and we understand our total cost to deliver this agreement, in this example is $67.50, we apply the desired 65% margin to that, we're going to come up with a floor price of $192.85. Now, the math here is listed below, but as you can see, if we add those costs and divide it by the difference between one and the margin expected, right? 0.35 here in this case, we're going to get that $192.85. What this tells us is if these numbers hold true every single time, right, we're going to be in a really good position to make that 65% margin. So when we think of this floor price, this isn't the price I'm going to say you should charge this amount, right? This is going to be the minimum, assuming everything's true, to hit that profitability number. So you may want to start with $200 depending on this stack and this amount of engagement that you have to require for your managed services. So this is obviously going to float depending on how much time and how much stack you put in there, but understanding this calculation is really that first step. And then over time, making sure that this matches up. As we get months out into the process, are we holding true on our profitability? Are we going too high? Are we going too low? Where do we need to be? And we can monitor that over time. But a critical piece of making sure we're profitability and we're not broke. Now, from the pricing hourly or project labor side, it's a little bit different. Now, we'll have a lot of MSPs that will tell us, we don't do hourly work. Well, You probably do project work, so it's really kind of the same thing. But at the end of the day, we're targeting a little bit different metric here. If we want to hit that 33% service salaries to service revenue, and we want to hit 55% service gross profit, we need to look at something called the 4.5 or 4.5x rule. Now, understanding that rule, just in general, we're going to say if we have a team member who is, costing us $20 an hour, we need to bill out 4.5 times that hourly rate to get to a profitable margin. Now, a lot of owners and maybe even some employees who find this out might say, wow, that's a really big difference. But we got to do a little math to understand why we use this number. So first things first, we expect in most cases a 75% utilization. Now, utilization is overhyped for its direct effectiveness on managing efficiency in teams, but it's a great indicator of how efficient our teams can be. So understanding that this number can shift up and down depending on the amount of vacation you give, basically your time off policy, and how you leverage that role. A lot of meetings, right? Versus a lot of billable time won't change this utilization number necessarily, but it will change the multiple we have to do in here to get the profitability we're looking for. So moving on to that, so if we figured, hey, in general, 80 hours in a year at 75% utilization puts us at around 1,540 available utilized hours. Now, we'll just run through the math. If we expect that 3 to 1, right? Mm-hmm. So for every dollar of service salaries, we need $3 of revenue, and reverse is true, right? For every $3 of revenue, we need $1 of salary. We're going to spend $1 of salary. We have to expect that 3x rate. So let's say an engineer in general is making $80,000, and we'll show this in a graph so it'll make a little more sense here in a second. We would expect that $80,000 employee to produce roughly $240,000 in revenue. Now, this gets really challenging when we have engineers that do hourly work and project work and agreement support and escalation. But in general, this number is going to hold true throughout the processing or calculation. So we use this as an understanding of where we want to be with revenue. So real quickly, if we said, hey, at $240,000 or $240,000 in revenue and 1,540 hours of availability, we'd have to charge out, in this case, $155.84, which equals a 3.89x multiple. Now, you may say, well, why don't we use the 3.89 rule, right? But we understand also things happen, and we know that 75% utilization doesn't necessarily turn into 75% billable time, right? So we put a little bit of a buffer in there and get that up to the 4.5x. And that's really where this comes in. So how we actually make this happen on a tactical basis is if we look at the different roles in our company. Now, you may have one tier, you may have 5 tiers, but just looking at these from kind of a high level perspective, we want to take roughly the average salary of each tier. So if you have 5 technicians, all making 50,000 even, great. It's pretty easy to do that math. If they're all over the board a little bit, take a rough average of the total salary and use that for your calculation. Same for the other tiers. Now, if you have one employee who's significantly higher, you just need to be aware of that. Maybe shift the number up a little bit to cover that. But this is a little bit of an art and a little bit of a science here, trying to get to that middle number, whether you use median or average. That'll give us their rough hourly rate. Now, I just divided it by 2,000 instead of by 2080, but we're going to get to a pretty close number here on that hourly rate. Now we multiply that by 4.5, we're going to get that floor pricing. Now, again, hitting that floor pricing, what we're targeting here is saying, hey, at this rate, if everything else is true, we're going to hit a solid profitability. We're going to hit that, 3x or 33% service salary to service revenue. It's going to help us get to 55% service department gross profit. Now, in your market, right, we may say, hey, I can charge a little more than this. I can charge, $150 for my technicians. Awesome, do it, right? But at the same time, we want to say, we have a lot of MSPs out there saying, I'm going to charge one flat rate. And in this example, I'm just going to charge $150 an hour. If I average it across everybody, we're still going to make money. And while that technically is true, we really lose out on that super high-end skill profit because we think about our senior engineers, the team members who have been there probably the longest, have the most certifications, probably the most knowledge. We want to make sure we maximize the profitability of those team members so we can bonus them out and do other good things, hire more of them. But so looking at the tiered system really helps us understand where we can be with hourly and project labor profitability. Now, when we think back to that service catalog, we talked a little bit, we do have examples for hourly, and we do have examples for projects. A couple of areas that we get in trouble when we think about pricing these out are the features or the options. So as an example, after hours, it's pretty straightforward. A lot of MSPs will charge 1.5 or 2x the hourly rate for after hours work. And again, you can define what after hours means to you, but making sure we have that in the service catalog and in the client's agreement so that we can bill those after hours rates and hopefully pay a little bit extra to our team for that extra hard work after hours. And then we have our emergency rate. Now, not every MSP loves this, but if I'm fully utilizing my team with projects and other work, and I have to pull somebody off to go work on an emergency, we would call that an emergency rate. Now, this is a discretionary rate that we can consider depending on the amount of availability we have on our bench, right? But at the end of the day, it gives us the option to say, well, if I have to pull somebody off a project and I have to make that customer wait, which they would want as well in an emergency, I am going to charge you more in this situation. Now, agreements get in the way of this, but we can make our agreements say emergency rates. We can do a lot of different things, but it's giving you from the pricing of an hourly and a project labor perspective. Last is the tough one, and that's travel. So we're going to say, understandably, if you have hours of commute time between yourself and your client, right, we have to be real strategic with this. But let's say we have average travel times. We're within 30 minutes. Again, just picking that number because average is going to be different to you. We want to charge both ways because those team members are in that car, right? They are going to the site to do the work. Now, if we don't, that's where the real challenge comes in. We have to change our rate because we can't hit the numbers. If we think of the 33% service salaries to service revenue, if 10% of the time they're in a car, I have to take 10% more hours away from my calculation, increasing that multiple. So things to think about. If we don't want to charge travel, then we have to beef up the rate to still cover that time to be profitable. Hope that makes sense. Again, in 30 minutes, this is a lot of ground to cover. So I would love to get in deeper with anybody who wants to talk about this in the future. Now the big ugly, and this is probably my favorite part of the conversation. If we understand where we should be from an agreement perspective, and we understand where we should be from an hourly and project labor perspective, we can do some calculations that typically frustrates MSP that might be in that kind of broke feeling world, right? And so we're going to start by figuring out where we're at. And this is a real simple calculation, depending on how you charge. If you charge per user or per node or some other combination of everything, we need to do some quick math. Every category that we bill in, we're going to take our counts divided by the total revenue in that category to get the per X total. Now, in this example, really straightforward. Let's say I just charge per user. I don't charge for servers. I don't charge for networks. I just keep everything in one bucket. Again, this is my easy math. The more line items you have, the harder the math. But again, this is pretty straightforward. Just some quick counts. I have 200 users and I get $30,000 in revenue on those 200 users. I'm getting $150 per user. Same thing for our project and hourly labor. I'm just going to do the math divided by the total revenue in that category to get our per X total, giving us $50,000 in monthly revenue. Now comes the fun part, right? Let's do the reverse of this and say, what if we had that agreement rate we just calculated and the hourly and project rates that we just calculated? So let's say, we know our new floor price for our managed service agreement is $192.85. Let me multiply the 200 users by times the $192.85 to get to where the maximum revenue should be today. Same with the project multiple, same with the hourly multiple. And in this specific case, right, we say, well, we were getting 50,000. We should be getting 65,570. And again, this is at floor pricing. It doesn't include any buffer that you add in there. So we're at roughly losing $186,000 per year just by not doing that pricing update, by guessing a little bit on where we need to be for our pricing, letting our competitors tell us what our pricing is, letting our clients tell us what our pricing is, versus letting the math tell us what our pricing is. Again, if our pricing is too high, my question is, what do you want me to take out? I either have to take out some labor or I have to take out some software, because otherwise I need to have this price at this level to make this solution work. Now, makes our revenue efficiency, again, we talked early on about the revenue efficiency side of things, 76%. And this is rough. We've seen this number be 50%, meaning, the current revenue that the MSP was bringing in was 50% of where it should be to have healthy profit. And not surprising, that MSP really, really struggled. We call them a broke MSP, and we say that with love because they're friends, but they're really falling into that category, struggling and stressed over revenue, client, and employee satisfaction. So and that's my dog, by the way, how do we make this work, right? So a couple of things we can do really quickly. First things first, things we can change today. So if you run the math right now, if you're doing this as we go, and you're like, I am $24.50 below the floor pricing of where I need to be on my engineer, change it today. Right. And I understand that you may have agreements, you may have contracts, but change it for every single thing you can going forward for both the hourly and project rates. Also, make sure your hardware margin is at least 20%. Now, this isn't markup, this is margin. You can do the calculation some other time. I don't have that in here. Let's just make sure that's in there and correct. We look 30 days out. Update all future agreement pricing. Now, this is going to be, you probably have a few clients in the pipeline today that you're talking to that you may have given pricing to, right? We want to make sure we do this calculation a couple times, test it across all of your client bases, or at least several different clients, to make sure those numbers will hold true when we math them out on our bigger clients and even our smaller clients. Then update that service catalog, update that pricing. In 30 days, we won't sell another unprofitable contract going forward. This is where we get a lot of pushback. In 90 days, change every single past agreement. Now, again, I understand you may have 3-year agreements. You may have something else. This is going to sound crazy, but it doesn't hurt to talk to them about it. Say, hey, we are in an unprofitable position on this agreement. We are going to change it as soon as possible. We'd love to change it now. And if we change it now, we can ramp this up. Maybe you can give them some other benefits to change the pricing in 90 days versus at the end of their agreement when they're going to have a big jump. Find a way to work that pricing in. But the sooner we can do this, especially on the lower profitability agreements, the better it is for your holistic MSP. And then for sure, every time we can, build this into our contracts that we can change pricing annually, at least 4 agreements. And this is going to be in your managed service agreement contract. Hopefully everybody has this already. One kind of, I guess, popular version of this is say, hey, I can change this 3% plus or minus, the consumer price index every year on January 1st. This gives us a little flexibility to add a little more profit into it. So if inflation, I'll just use the term inflation, is 3%, I can change this up to 6% to get a little more revenue, especially if someone's slightly behind in their agreements and we just need to give them a little boost, but it helps us really get that going forward. So the pushback we get on this is typically comes from, and again, I'll say that tough mindset of an MSP owner. Most of us came up through this as technical engineers. And so we've had to learn how to be salespeople. We've had to learn how to be business owners. But when we look back on this, we'll say your clients want you to be successful. They want you to continue to show up. They want good response time. They want to understand what the trends are. And that kind of stuff takes time and it takes money. You have to be profitable to be proactive. So understand that your success is good for them. The business's tier growth also is expensive. So when I said you go to 1 million and you got to hire a dispatcher, and you go to 3 million, you got to hire a service manager. We have to have those revenues available to us so we can hire the right people, and we're not scrounging trying to get those people inexpensively. So we have to be careful and make sure we have that profit in there right away. Communication is critical in this process, super important. Anytime we're changing someone's pricing. Now, if I'm changing it $10 a month, I probably can do that over email. If I'm changing it 25%, probably want to meet in person, probably want to stage it out and make sure that they understand that we care, get the empathy going from that side. And a few other bullets in there, one-on-ones may be necessary. And the last point I really want to make, and not to read all of these, is that the first conversation is really the only hard one. I personally had to go through this with all of my clients. When we exited, we had to upgrade some pricing because the new company was a little more expensive in a good way. So I had to meet with every single client, or had to communicate this with every single client. The first one was really hard. After that, it got pretty easy. It kind of became a challenge, something I could hopefully win at. So I encourage you to do it. Don't be afraid. Your clients want you to be successful, and it won't be as painful as you think. Now, a couple win-win conversations. I'll just get this all up here real quick. When we think of saying, hey, I'm going to upgrade price, and they may come back saying, hey, it's too expensive, right? This is too expensive for me. I didn't sign up for this. We really want to look at a lot of the risks that are out there. And you could look at hardware, software vulnerabilities. You could look at cybersecurity, data protection. You can kind of take your direction on the conversation, or all three. But understanding that most of the time when we're charging more, we're doing things to reduce risk, whether that's enhanced threat detection. We're doing things on the MDR, SIM, BCDR side, but help them understand those risks that they really have. So battling over price is never challenging. Battling on helping them avoid risk is where we really want to be. I'm telling you stuff you already know, but understand, I think this was the ITIC report showed a single server cost $167 per minute of downtime. So this stuff gets really expensive. And again, not every SMB wants numbers thrown at them, but we really want to get to that understanding risk side when we start talking about expensiveness of services. Next is that I don't think we're a target for this. We don't have the risks, right? Really the same conversation. When we said I can't afford it versus we're not a target, we're saying the same thing. I don't understand why I would pay more. I don't need it. Well, this one is a little bit different. I'd say we would target I don't understand the current landscape. So one is their individual risk. The first one's too expensive, is their individual risk. This one, when they say they're not a target, they don't understand the risks out there. They don't understand that Microsoft's seeing 11,000 password attacks per minute, right? It's crazy, or per second. They're not seeing these things. So a couple key points we can talk about when we're going to upgrade pricing, or just understanding that AI-based email attacks are on the rise. They're significant and impactful. If you're not using a true advanced email protection solution, you're probably having some links, probably having some bad emails slip through that have been generated by AI and just look perfect. So we need a natural language processing. We need the education. We need those kind of things to defend against AI attacks. We want AI defending AI. We don't want people trying to battle against it. We get tired and lazy at times. So managing vulnerabilities is obviously important. Doing that vulnerability scanning, continual side of things is super important. And obviously the SaaS security challenges. We think about all the data we have in the cloud. Now, Microsoft 365 is easy for us to back up, but a lot of other ones have risks, and we can just provide awareness to that. We're not going to protect against it, but providing that awareness and thought leadership can show how the targets can bleed through into a lot of different areas. And that's it. Just wanted to go through that, avoid being a broke MSP, and typically that comes from a couple different steps, right? Making sure we define specifically what we do through the service catalog, and make sure we actually use that math and the reviews of that math over time to ensure we're hitting the profitability metrics that we're looking for. A couple of places where you can go and find a little bit more information on this, whether it's PSA or some cyber tool or some pricing and guidelines. First is our ConnectWise partner program, and you can visit that at connectwise.com/partner-program. And then there's the university. If you're a ConnectWise client, you're going to have access to both of these, and that'd be university.connectwise.com. I'm Jim Peterson, Principal Solution Advisor and Cyber PMM at ConnectWise. And you can reach me at jim.peterson@connectwise.com. Till next time, thanks for joining. If you have any questions, hit me up.